A while back, Camilla and I watched a series on, well, I think it was HBO. I'm going to say HBO. And it was called Pillars of the Earth. It's based on a Ken Follett novel, a sweeping historical epic that he wrote somewhere in the 1980s. And I think it was just like a one-season deal on HBO or wherever it was. But it was really, really good. I don't think I recommend it for the purposes of not sending you off to watch something that's horribly offensive. I can't remember. I don't know. I'm hard to offend, whatever. I really appreciated the show. It's about the building of this great fictional cathedral in England in the Middle Ages. And I think I've heard that Ken Follett was drawing on the story of the building of Salisbury Cathedral and Wells Cathedral. And until I saw this show, I just never really thought much about all of the energy and drama and politics and time and death and bloodshed and money and resistance that you would run into in trying to build a truly multi-generational thing like one of these great medieval cathedrals. But the writing and the cast of characters brought it to life and made me think about that for the first time. The cast, by the way, my goodness. The guy from Deadwood, Al Swearingen. Come on, Matt. You got Ian McShane. He's in John Wick as well. He's the guy who runs the hotel in John Wick. He was in it and was great. Young Haley Atwell, Peggy Carter from the Captain America stuff. She was in it. And Eddie Redmayne. Before he got big, I think it was the first role I ever saw him in as well. And then a bunch of those actors, you don't know their names, but they're in all the cool stuff that involves British accents. So again, I want to recommend it, but I think I need to not recommend it. The point is, though, back to it, it was the first time I had ever thought about just how hard it would be to muster the resources and overcome the resistance that would naturally spring up to such a great, big, grand idea. Who was the architect from the Chicago World's Fair, the Columbian Exposition? Root and I can't remember his partners. Burnham and Root, they were the two. And one of those two guys, maybe it was Burnham, said something like, don't dream small dreams. They have no power to stir men's souls. And so when you dream a great big project like this, it not only is going to stir men's souls in positive ways to get on board and be a part of a thing, it's also going to stir the souls of people toward jealousy and envy and resistance. And likewise, as you and I have been looking at the later Old Testament here and the story that we get in the book of Ezra about the rebuilding of the temple, we see that, again, a project that big ain't going to be easy for the land, for the money, for the resistance, for the stirring of people's souls, both toward enthusiasm and toward anger about your project. And we really get a very Pillars of the Earthy story here in Ezra, or maybe Pillars of the Earth is a very Ezra-ish story. Ezra's given us the fast version here, and that can cause us to forget how big a chunk of time we're talking about. This edict that Cyrus II issued dates all the way back to 538. By the time we get to the second year of the reign of King Darius, we've already had a decade and a half of resistance and red tape. This has been a massively difficult project for all sorts of logistical and interpersonal conflict reasons. Prophets have had to have been mustered to get this thing moving again. So then if you take a minute to think of this project in light of all that resistance and all the blood, sweat, and tears and everything that went into it and the providential work of God to move kings and to move about seemingly unrelated, gigantic historical events happening in Persian politics to make this go, it just makes it all that much more satisfying when you get to the end of chapter 6 and the thing gets rebuilt. The temple is up and it's being rededicated. And I want to read a little bit from Ezra 6 here so you and I can appreciate and bask in this triumphant moment the dedication of the temple a little bit as well. Picking it up in Ezra 6:13. Then, because of the decree King Darius had sent, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Sethar-Bozenai, I still am not getting that name right, and their associates carried it out with diligence. So the elders and the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah, a descendant of Iddo. They finished building the temple according to the command of the God of Israel and the decree of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. Again, this is Ezra rounding out the fast-forwarding that he did to show that the support for the temple and the resistance to the temple and the rebuilding of the things around it and the rebuilding of the culture around it continued long past the reign of Darius into the mid-400s. I know that's a little bit chronologically confusing as a writing style, but this isn't him just screwing it up and forgetting who was alive when. And why he keeps jumping forward with all of this becomes more evident as you read the rest of Ezra and Nehemiah, but we're just going to roll with it. And okay, so we got Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, kings of Persia. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month Adar in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. So that's going to be March. I used to know this. I don't know the date. I don't have it written down in front of me. Mid-March somewhere. 516 BC. You'll see some people who put this at 515 a while back, maybe 30, 40 years ago. There's a little bit of debate about where exactly to put Darius's ascendance to the throne and how that would have been dated, whether it was after the killing of Bardia or whether it was after he went and fought and put those 9 wars and put down the rest of the rebellions. But it looks like we're pretty sure this is 516, March, mid-March somewhere of 516 BC. It's kind of cool that we're getting to that level of detail when we get into the later parts of the Old Testament. I just think that's fun. Then the people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. For the dedication of this house of God, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and as a sin offering for all Israel, 12 male goats, 1 for each of the tribes of Israel. And they installed the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their groups for the service of God at Jerusalem, according to what is written in the book of Moses. And I think it's okay to celebrate with them. If you've been on this journey through the Old Testament, heck, even if you're just jumping in with me now here on this series on the book of Esther, which I understand has a whole lot of other parts of the Bible in it on the run up to it. But if you've even been here with me through this, it's okay to just breathe for a minute here and appreciate the greatness of this accomplishment, the unlikelihood of this accomplishment. Building has gotten to be so dime a dozen with modern technology that we almost take it for granted that everybody should just have something built for them. Like, I don't know, you should call a contractor or something, you give them some money, or heck, you don't even give them money. Just go to the bank and be like, I need money. And in many economic climates, the bank's like, yeah, sure, here's some money. And then buildings, they just happen. They spring up out of nowhere. That's not how things were back then, especially a building like this that means something. This isn't an Arby's we're talking about where it's effectively politically neutral. I don't know, maybe vegans don't find it politically neutral. No, this means something. This is the reestablishment of a people group who were on the brink of being gone. This building and the investment that went into it and the battle to get it done, oftentimes literally the battle to get it done, comes with great promise that the people who built it will continue to be a people and that the worship of their God, the one true God, the God of Abraham, is going to persist. The existence of this building, though it seems like a bit of a foreign concept given how we think about building today, back then the existence of this building was a physical monument to the continuation of the promise of God to see through his redemptive plan. And you'll notice that what we don't see here in Ezra chapter 6 is a mix of crying and celebration like what we saw a few chapters back. Remember, back in Ezra 3, we're talking about 20 years earlier than the dedication stuff we're looking at in chapter 6. But all the people give this great shout because of the foundation. It says, but many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping because the people made so much noise and the sound was heard far away. Well, some things have changed in these 20 years. And that begs the question, well, what has changed in the psyche of these people? Is it that now it's not just a foundation, it's a building? And hey, it might not be quite like the old one, but great, let's roll with it. And this is wonderful. Something we got this done. We achieved. We pillars of the earth to this thing. Or is what's changed just that in 20 years, those oldest people who would still remember what the old Temple of Solomon looked like, they've all died off. And so there's no one left to compete with the celebration with crying because that had faded out of living memory. I don't know. The temple is an amazing accomplishment against all odds. This shouldn't have happened. The Jewish people at this point, they're half slaves, basically. They're exiles. They're homeless. They have no business being able to pull something like this off. They have no power, at least not temporal, tangible, physical, worldly power. And yet there that building is in March of 516 BC. That thing tells a story. Pretty cool. That said, the story's not done, because just because the building is finished does not mean that everything else that goes with it is back on its feet and established for the long haul. And as we see the end of Darius's reign roll over into the beginning of Xerxes' reign and then all the way into his son Artaxerxes' reign, we see that there is still a lot of business to be done. And the rest of the book of Ezra/Nehemiah, or Ezra and Nehemiah, walks us through that. And we'll hit the highlights of how Ezra and Nehemiah round out that part of the story. But for those of you who've been around the Old Testament a little bit, for those of you who remember what the dedication of the temple was like the first time around, Solomon's temple, there is one big question that's still hanging out here. And that is, will the tangible, visible Spirit of God show up and occupy this temple the same way the Spirit of God did during the dedication of the Temple of Solomon? Some of you already know and remember the answer to that. Others of you might not. And tomorrow we're going to talk about it. Final thought, as you may remember, a couple days ago, I had my good friend Jeff Foote take on the task of squishing together something that is homage to the Top Gun anthem with something that is homage to Ahsokan Farewell. Ahsokan Farewell? Ashokan Farewell? I still don't know how to pronounce it. I've tried a bunch of different things. If somebody knows, would you let me know on the subreddit or what? I don't know how to say it. I'm trying, I'm faking it. But the point is, Jeff mushed those things together and it sounded really awesome. And I've had him do a slight re-edit on that would be great for a ringtone. Anyone who is a patron at patreon.com/thetmbh podcast at any level, that's going to be available to you over there for free to just have fun with if you want to. Thank you, Jeffrey. That's it. I'm Matt. This is the 10 Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.